Hello and welcome to another Python tutorial. So in today's video, we're going to cover something pretty special, I think. We're going to see how we can run Python pandas in an open Excel work basically instantly. So the whole goal is to see how we can take our Excel work and maybe, for example, some information like this, import it into pandas, maybe do some calculations or whatever it might be, and then just plop it right back inside into my Excel workbook. But here's the thing, I don't want to close my workbook. I don't want to have to open it or anything like that. I just want to keep it the way it is right now, load it in, do my transformation, and then plop it right back in. So I think that's kind of useful. I think really the idea behind this, ideally, is two things. You could create a macro that calls a Python script, because we now have a video up that shows us how to call Python scripts from VBA. And what we can now do is leverage the power of pandas in Excel, which is pretty useful because pandas can handle a much larger data set. They can do a lot more complicated calculations and all that kind of fun stuff. But what we need is all just kind of the end result. We can just take the end result and then see it kind of instantly and then test it and play it around with it. So with that being said, as you can tell, I already have my workbook open. I've got my Jupyter notebook open. We're going to start coding away. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to import our libraries. The first one is going to be win32com.client. And so this is basically our plugging in mechanism to plug into the Windows API to control the VBA object model. So very useful. Fortunately, it is only for Windows users. So I have yet to find a way to control VBA through a Mac. But if I come across it, I'll make sure to do a video on that. Also, we're going to have to import one more library. It's going to be pandas, and then we're going to use an alias when we're calling it. And so basically with the alias, all I have to do is type PD, and I'm now referring to the pandas library. So now that I've done that, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to get the active instance of Excel. So I'm going to get the active instance of Excel. Now, when I get this instance, I want to store it in a variable, so that way all I have to do is call that variable, and I'm referring to the active instance of Excel. And so I'm going to create a variable called Excel app. I'm going to set that equal to win32com. We're going to call the client, and then we're going to call the get active object. And then this one takes a parameter. It's a string. And all I need to pass through is the application that I want, or at least the object that I want to get. And then with this one, if I want, I can just simply run it again. I can tell that I have my object, so I'm good to go. Now with this, what I'm going to do is I have basically all the code that I need for the first section. So I'm going to insert a new cell, so that way I don't have to keep importing the libraries and all that kind of fun stuff, right? This way I can just kind of keep my code segmented. So I'm going to insert a cell below. And then what I'm going to do from here is, now that I have an instance of Excel that I can reference, let's get the workbook that I'm working out of. And so again, I'm going to create a variable that will allow me to reference my workbook. So create a reference to the workbook I am working out of. And then this one, again, variable. This one will equal the Excel app. We're going to go in the workbooks collection. I can either use the index method or the key method. We saw kind of with other videos, the index method, there's a lot of stuff that you got to consider, whether they have a personal macro workbook or any of that kind of fun stuff. I'm just going to simply pass through the key method and then pass through the name of my workbook along with the extension. And then just to make sure that I have it, I will call the name property. I can see that I have the name. So I'm good. I have a reference now to my workbook. And then now that I have a reference to my workbook, I'm going to do this one a little bit differently. Technically, we don't have to refer to the worksheet to refer to the range that I'm talking about. I could go directly into my Excel app and then call the range object. Now, later in the code, I'm going to have to reference the worksheet at some point, but I don't technically have to do that for a range object. And so how do I do that? So what I can do is I'm just going to create a reference What is going on? Okay, reference to a range of cells. And so I'm going to store this one in another variable called Excel range. It's going to equal the Excel app. And then I'm going to pass through the range. And I'm going to want A1 to C5. So this range right here, I want to insert this range into Python and then into a, into a Pandas data frame. Now, if I wanted to, I could technically make sure that I have it. So for example, if I go and I call the value property, it will show me basically my record set. As you can tell, it's a kind of a tuple within a tuple, but this is our record set that we can now play with if we call the value property. And then technically too, if I did this, this is still valid. So I'll keep it like this because technically this is what we want. We want the records. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to store my records in a Pandas series. So that just makes it easier when we're trying to put it into our data frame. We can just call that series and then we can slice it and dice it when we need to get certain information. We'll kind of see why that's important in a second. But the first thing I want to do is I want to load it into my Pandas series. So load data into a Pandas series. And so we'll call it raw data. And then what we'll call it is the Panda series object. And then we'll pass through the Excel range. And then if I, just call this, we can now see it is a Pandas series. So almost identical, but now we have indexes and it's a different data type and stuff like that. Okay, so in order to create my data frame, I'm going to pass through a couple of parameters. One is obviously the data itself. And then I can pass through the column names, and then I can also pass through the index. Well, with the column names, it's pretty easy to get. And then with the data one, that's kind of easy to get. With the index one, I'm just going to type it in manually. Again, kind of just demonstrate different ways of doing things. But if I want to get, say, for the column names, I can clearly tell this has an index of 0. So if I just get the 0 index, I should return the column names. And then I'll store all this information in some variables. So get the column name and the raw data. And so we'll create a new variable called column names, and that is equal to the raw data, but that is the first row. And then again, if I call column names, I can now see I have the first row of my record set. And then I want the actual, the Excel data itself. So we'll call it the record data. I don't know if that's really the best way to call it, but whatever. Okay, and then basically this one is 1, and then everything after 1. So anything after the first row. And then if I print this out, I can see that it's all my records. So I have all the information. I can now create my data frame. So create a new data frame. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called data frame, set that equal to pandas, go into the data frame object, and then my first parameter will be data. That will equal my record data. Now, technically, if I run it just as is, we will get an error. I want to kind of show that to people first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do columns next, and that is equal to our column names. And I'm just going to put this to a new line. And then this is going to be the index. And then this is just going to be a list. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is kind of where people would naturally get tripped up a little bit. Oh my God, we get an error. Why? It's basically giving this information that's saying, hey, the shape of the pass value is really only kind of like one row with 4 record sets, but we're kind of implying that there's 3 columns with 3 rows with basically 3 columns with 4 record sets. And so easy way to fix this is we're just going to change this to a list object. So we're just going to take our record data and put it in through as a list. And then if I call it now, we don't get that error. And so now we have a data frame. And this is the cool thing. We haven't closed our Excel workbook. We're doing this all real time, which is nice. So all we did is we took this data, we now put it into a data frame, And now if we wanted to, we could do all sorts of things with it and all that kind of fun stuff. Now, I'll save that kind of for another video, but this is kind of just demonstrating that, hey, we can load it now real time from our Excel workbook into a Pandas data frame. So kind of cool. I thought that was cool. Now, let's take our data frame and put it back into our workbook, right? Okay, so to do this, we got to think a little bit, unfortunately. There's a couple pieces of information that will come in handy. The first piece of information that definitely comes in handy is the shape of our data frame. The shape property simply returns a tuple that represents the number of rows and the number of columns. So this one is saying there are 4 rows and 3 columns. The reason why this is important is because if we want to make sure that we dump all of our records into the correct location, we have to actually kind of specify the entire range. And so when I'm doing this, I have to make sure that if I want the record sets to go here, I have to specify this is the first cell and then this is the second cell. Well, getting the first cell is pretty easy for the most part. Most time that's always either you know that beforehand or you can easily get that. This one is a little bit more dynamic because this is going to change depending on the size of your record set and all sorts of things like that. And so in order to kind of make our lives easier, we're going to break this into a couple different components and then assemble everything kind of at the end of the day. And so the first thing I need to do is get the row count and column count. And so we're going to call this one row count. That's going to equal the data frame dot shape. And then that's going to be the first index. And then again, if you wanted to just prove it to yourself, we can see it's 4. And then this one will equal the column count. And then again, data frame dot shape. But now we want the second element in our tuple. So we have the row and the column count. That's great. When we're taking our data from a data frame and putting it back in to a actual Excel worksheet, we can't just take the data frame and plop it in there. We need to get the records from that data frame, and then we have to do a simple transformation to that record set. And so to get the record set first we need to take our data frame and get the records. So we're going to get the records from our data frame. And so this is pretty straightforward. We're going to create a new variable called record array. We're going to go in our data frame object, and then we're going to call the toRecords method. And so what this one's going to return back is a NumPy record array that looks something like this. It's all messy. We can't use this the way it is. But what we can do is if we simply take our old record array and call the toList method, and then do that. Now we got something we can work with. This I can put back into my Excel worksheet. The first one, I couldn't put back into my Excel worksheet. It would have given me all sorts of kind of weird stuff, and it just wouldn't work. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's reference our worksheet, get the starting cell and the ending cell for our record set, and then we'll populate everything as is. And so from here, what we can do is we'll reference our Excel worksheet, and then again, we'll set this equal to my workbook into the worksheets collection, and then I just want simply sheet 1. So this one right down here. Okay, now that I've done that, get the starting cell and ending cell for the record set. Trying to think maybe what would be, well, we'll do a little bit differently because with this one, we have to keep in mind, we're only having the record set here. And so right now we don't technically have the columns. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take the column names that we got from the series. There's other ways we could get the column names. But again, just for simplicity at this point, let's just take the information that we already have. But again, there are other ways where we can get the columns from a data frame and stuff like that. But here, let's just kind of keep it simple. So we want to get the starting and the ending cell for our record set. And then our record set's going to go into this little section right here, right? So it's not starting up here. That's for our columns. It's starting here, F2 to I5. And so the start cell, if I can type, is going to equal the Excel worksheet. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the cells, and then we're going to pass through the row and then the column. So row 2, column 6. So we got our starting cell. Now we need our ending cell. Again, very similar. And then this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Okay, so we want 2 plus the row count minus 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, well, technically it's going to go here because it's going here. That's why we're doing the -1, because if I do it normally, it's going to go down here. I don't want it to go down here. I want it to go 1 less. So I stop it here. But then with columns, it's fine. We can just simply take the 6 and then put the column count. What is it? What is it? Oh, the column count. Lost it there for a second. And then these ones, these are just simply referring to the shape of my particular record set. So, I'm sorry, to my data frame. So this one, again, is my row count, which I'm using right here. And then here's my column count. So different ways to do this, obviously. I mean, this is something you probably could find 10 or 15 different ways to do it. Here's one way of doing it. I'm sure there probably would be other ways. Some are going to work better in some situations than other situations. But at this point, let's just kind of get the data back into our worksheet. Oh, another update. I had 3 of those tonight. It's been ridiculous. Okay. So now that we've done that, we can start populating stuff. And so populate the Excel range. And so the first one, I'm going to go in the Excel app into the range object, and I'm going to populate the column headers first. And so that's going to go from, what is it? G1 to I1. You might be asking why G1. Well, this one's going to return back the indices. So really, my actual records are starting here. So that's just kind of the way I do it. And then we're going to set the value property is equal to the column names. And then the next one, which is going to take the starting cell and then the ending cell. And then that one, again, call the value property and set that equal to the record array. Press Control Enter. Bam. Our data is now back into our Excel workbook. Cool thing. We never closed it. We never saved it. Nothing. That's why I think this is kind of cool. We can now create kind of this interactive environment where we have our Jupyter Notebook open and we can start leveraging the power of Python and built-in Python libraries in order to simply start manipulating our data. That's cool because there's a lot of stuff in Excel that we could have in Python if we simply moved over to Python. But now what this is doing is it's giving us that added benefit of Python and simply integrating it into our Excel workbook. But we're not having to change that much. That's really the crazy thing. We're still doing the same VBA model. We're just integrating it within the Python libraries. And so all we have to understand is how we can take data and move it around and then put it back where it needs to be. Now, over time, ideally, people will kind of find better ways to make it more efficient and that kind of fun stuff. But at this point, we can now leverage Pandas inside of Excel. And naturally, what we could do too is we could call a Python script, do all the other stuff, and then drop it right back in here. So if we need to do some complicated calculations, if we need to do some machine learning models and stuff like that, we could just make this all seamless for a user and then even create add-ins potentially where all you're doing is you're calling Python scripts. That's it. So I think it's cool. I think this is easy kind of to get running with. And I think over time, ideally, new people will kind of come out there with hopefully better ideas than me. But at least this is kind of getting people started to a certain extent. So if you have any questions, please put them down in the comments below. I know this can kind of all be new at once, and I want to make sure, if you have questions, I can help you through it. And then also, if you could make sure to like the video, we always appreciate the support. We want to make sure other people can find it and things like that. So when you guys like it, when you guys subscribe, it helps a ton. Trust me. Also, if you're not already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. So I'm going to keep exploring pandas. Obviously, there's a lot that we can do with pandas. There's a whole YouTube channel that is dedicated to pandas. That's how complicated that wonderful library can become. And then also what I'm going to go into is certain machine learning libraries. I'm really excited to kind of start doing machine learning right from Excel. Maybe it's more optimized linear regressions to begin with, or just doing more customizable linear regressions and then integrating that right into an Excel workbook. I think that would be cool. API calls from an Excel workbook. I'm really looking forward to that. And just things like that where maybe we could even somehow dump web scraping directly into our Excel workbook. There's a lot that we can potentially now do now that we see how to kind of build this environment where we're kind of setting ourselves up for that easy transition of data. So thanks again for watching, guys. We will see you in the next video.